Nobody runs on a frozen lake at 5 in the morning unless they are lost or afraid, and the shape Jimmy Kowalski saw moving across the ice in the gray, pre-dawn light of Lake Superior's Keweenaw Bay was doing both, a long-legged silhouette moving in wide, panicked arcs across the snow-dusted surface, too fast and too directionless to be anything with a plan. Jimmy was already out on the ice at that hour because the ice fishing season did not observe the hours he had been keeping since the lawsuit began, and because the hours he had been keeping since the lawsuit began were not hours a man should keep without something outside himself to focus on. He watched the shape for 3 minutes before he understood it was a dog, and another 2 before he understood it was not going to stop on its own, and by then he was already moving toward it, which was the kind of decision he used to make without thinking and had spent 18 months trying to remember how to make again. If this story can find you wherever you are tonight, tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and subscribe to this channel before we go further. Because what Jimmy Kowalski found running across a frozen lake at 5 in the morning was not only a lost dog. It was the beginning of the first thing in 18 months that required him to be useful to something other than his own guilt. Jimmy Kowalski was 56 years old and had the kind of face that the Upper Peninsula of Michigan produces in men who spend most of their lives outdoors. Broad and weathered, with deep-set dark eyes under heavy brows, a square jaw that his ex-wife had once said looked like it had been borrowed from someone larger, and a Polish-American coloring that went red in the cheeks in the cold and stayed that way most of the winter. He was thick through the chest and forearms, with the particular density of a man who had been genuinely strong for decades rather than the gym-manufactured version, and his hands were large and scarred and entirely comfortable with the cold in the way that hands become when they have handled ice augers and fishing line and boat rigging for 30 years. He had been a Navy SEAL for 16 years, had left at 38 to come back to the Upper Peninsula and build a life that was entirely his, and had spent the following 18 years doing exactly that. Guiding ice fishing expeditions on Keweenaw Bay in winter and charter fishing on Lake Superior in summer, becoming the kind of local fixture that people who visit a place remember because he knew the lake the way some people know a language, not academically but in his body. He had been good at it, better than he had expected, and he had been happy in the particular, undemonstrative way of men who find the thing they are supposed to do and do it without requiring it to mean more than it means. 18 months ago, on a September afternoon when the lake was doing what it sometimes does in September, turning from an afternoon of calm blue into an evening of 6-foot swells in under 2 hours, a charter boat he was captaining had been caught by a weather system that moved faster than the forecast model had predicted and had capsized 3 miles from shore in water cold enough to take a healthy adult in under 40 minutes. Jimmy had survived because of a combination of a SEAL's cold water training and the proximity of the overturned hull. His 4 clients, 2 couples from Milwaukee on a late-season fishing trip, had not survived, despite everything Jimmy had done in the water after the capsize, and the thing he had done in the water after the capsize had been considerable and had not been enough. And the determination of what enough would have looked like was still being argued in a civil court by 2 sets of attorneys who sent him paperwork at intervals that seemed calibrated to prevent him from forgetting it for more than 3 weeks at a time. He had not been found negligent in any criminal or Coast Guard investigation. The civil case remained open. What remained open in Jimmy himself was not something any legal process was going. He had kept guiding, because stopping would have been a different kind of surrender than the one he was already living with, and because the lake was the thing he knew and the thing he knew was the thing he had. He had reduced his summer charter operations significantly and focused on the ice fishing season, where the risks were better defined and the weather systems moved differently, and the clients were mostly regulars who knew the Keweenaw the way he did. His most reliable regular was Helvi Mekinen, 77 years old, Finnish-American, who had been fishing with him every January and February for 15 years, a small, precise woman with white hair, cut close and pale blue eyes that had the clarity of someone who had never once confused sentiment with truth. She had lost her husband Aino 8 years ago and had continued fishing every winter because Aino would have wanted her to, which she stated as fact rather than as tribute, because Helvi stated most things as fact. She brought a thermos of strong coffee and did not speak for the first hour on the ice because she considered the first hour sacred, and she caught fish at a rate that continued to embarrass men who had been doing this longer than she had. The Greyhound, when Jimmy finally caught up to her in the pre-dawn gray, was a brindle female, 2 or 3 years old, with the specific physical architecture of a retired racing dog. Impossibly long legs, a deep narrow chest, a waist that seemed structurally improbable, and a coat so short it offered essentially no insulation against a Michigan November morning. She was wearing a racing muzzle still strapped to her narrow head, a blue plastic racing jacket 2 sizes too large that had caught air and torn along one side, and a tattoo inside one ear that indicated she had come from a track somewhere south of here by a significant distance. She was shaking so violently when Jimmy reached her that her feet skittered on the ice, and when he put his hands on her, she did not try to escape, simply stood trembling inside his grip with the specific surrender of a creature that has run as far as running goes. He unstrapped the muzzle, and she turned her long face toward him and exhaled a breath that came out white in the cold air. And something about the surrender in it reminded him of water, of the moment in the water 18 months ago when he had understood that the thing he was trying to prevent had already been determined. He carried her the quarter-mile back to his ice fishing shanty, which was a serious structure, insulated and heated, built to spend a full day in at 20 below, and he wrapped her in the emergency blanket he kept in the supply box and fed her the sandwich he had brought for his own breakfast and called the county animal control officer, who did not answer at 5:30 in the morning, which was fair. He called Helvey instead, because Helvey answered at any hour and had opinions about most situations that tended to be more useful than most people's carefully considered positions. Helvey listened to his description and was quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which for Helvey was a long consideration. Then she said that a dog in a racing muzzle on a frozen lake in November had not put itself there, and that she would be on the ice at 7 as planned, and that he should heat the shanty to at least 65 because greyhounds had no fat, and the cold would kill them faster than most people understood. She hung up before he could respond, which was also characteristic. The dog's name, according to the racing registry that the animal control officer located when she called back at 8:30, was Arrow, registered to a racing kennel in Wisconsin that had closed 6 months earlier following an animal welfare investigation. Arrow had been transferred to a transport network that moved retired racers to adoption organizations, and somewhere between the kennel closure and a placement in the Upper Peninsula that had apparently not been adequately vetted, she had ended up in the care of a man in Chassel who had returned her to the transport network after 3 weeks. Helvey arrived at 7 with her fishing gear and her thermos, and a second thermos she had not mentioned on the phone, which contained chicken soup, and she set it on the small folding table in the shanty without comment, and crouched down in front of Arrow with the unhurried patience of a woman who has spent 77 years reading what living things needed before they knew how to ask for it. Arrow regarded her with the cautious assessment she applied to everything and then leaned forward and put her long, narrow nose against Helvey's cheek, which Helvey accepted without expression, though her eyes changed. "She is afraid of sudden movements," Helvey said, not as observation but as instruction. Jimmy said he had noticed. They fished in companionable silence for 2 hours, with Arrow lying between them on the folded blanket, her long body slowly releasing the last of the shivering as the shanty's heater brought the temperature up. He took Arrow to the veterinarian in Houghton the following morning, a young woman named Dr. Kate Brennan, who was thorough and unalarmed, and found Arrow to be underweight, mildly hypothermic in recovery, with an old hairline stress fracture in her left rear leg that had healed improperly and would limit her racing career to 0, but would not significantly affect her quality of life with appropriate management. She also found a retired racing dog in better psychological shape than her circumstances suggested, which she attributed to whatever had happened in the shanty the previous morning. She asked Jimmy if he was keeping her. He said he was working on it. She handed Arrow back to him, and Arrow pressed her long face under his arm the way she had been doing since the ice. And Dr. Brennan wrote in her chart, "Animal has identified primary attachment figure," and left it at that. The legal matter with the civil case resolved in February, not with vindication or condemnation, but with the particular gray compromise that litigation produces when both sides have been at it long enough to prefer an ending to the right answer. Jimmy received a document in the mail on a Tuesday and read it at the kitchen table and put it in a drawer and told Helvey about it the following Saturday on the ice. And Helvey said that she had known Aino for 43 years and that he had done something similar in his work once, made the best decision available and had it come out wrong, and that he had spent 3 years shorter than he should have trying to determine what the better decision would have been, and that she had told him the same thing she was going to tell Jimmy now, which was that the lake was not fair and never had been, and that fair was not the same as worth continuing. Jimmy looked at Arrow lying between them on the ice shanty floor, with her long legs stretched out, and her narrow face tilted toward the auger hole, as if monitoring the fishing situation personally. And he did not say anything, because Helvey's sentences usually left him without a productive response, which he suspected was intentional. In March, on a Saturday when the ice was still firm but the light had the quality of a season considering its options, a 9-year-old boy named Marcus from a family staying at the lodge 2 miles up the shore wandered out onto the bay alone before his parents were awake, following tracks he had seen from the window the evening before, and found a patch of ice that the current below had thinned without leaving a visible surface indication, which was the particular danger of Keweenaw Bay in the transition weeks, and went through. Jimmy heard the sound from his shanty, a particular concussive crack followed by a shorter silence that the lake made when ice gave way with something on it, and was moving before the silence ended. Because 16 years of sea, Arrow reached the hole and stopped at its edge with a precision that no one had taught her, and lay flat on the ice and extended her long neck toward the boy in the water. And Marcus grabbed her racing jacket with both hands because it was there, and she held, her claws splayed on the ice behind her, her body absorbing the pull of a panicking child in 34-degree water, with the specific physical commitment of a creature that has decided this is the thing she is doing and is going to do it until it is done or she is. Jimmy reached them 30 seconds later, drove the ice pick into solid surface, anchored himself, and got Marcus out of the water in under a minute, and Arrow backed away from the hole with the careful economy of an animal that has assessed the situation and confirmed its conclusion. Marcus was hypothermic and frightened, and in the hospital by noon and home with his parents by evening and completely fine, in the specific, slightly chastened way of children who have been frightened badly enough to be temporarily grateful. Jimmy sat on the ice after the ambulance left and Arrow sat beside him, and he put his arm around her narrow shoulders and she leaned against him, and the bay was completely quiet in the way it sometimes got in March, when the season was almost over and the ice had said most of what it had to say. He thought about September, about the water, about the 4 decisions he had replayed for 18 months, looking for the version that had a different ending. He thought about what Helvey had said about the lake not being fair. Arrow pressed her long head under his chin, and the bay was quiet, and the ice held, and Jimmy Kowalski sat on it for a long time without deciding anything, which was the closest he had come to peace since the capsize, and which was, he understood now, not the absence of the water but the presence of the shore. There are things the lake takes that it does not give back, and Jimmy Kowalski knew this as well as any man alive. What he had not known, until a brindled greyhound ran out of the dark onto the ice at 5 in the morning and ran until his hands stopped her, was that the lake also puts things on the ice sometimes, in the early hours before the light arrives, and that a man who is already out there for the wrong reasons might be out there for the right ones too. If this story reached you tonight, share it with someone who is sitting on a cold surface trying to decide whether to keep going. Tell us in the comments which moment moved you most and which city you are watching from. And if you can, look into a retired racing greyhound rescue near you, because they are the quietest, gentlest athletes you will ever meet, and they deserve somewhere soft to finally stop running. Subscribe to this channel, and we will keep finding these stories.